I've got three hats on today. I'm the Chief Engineer of International Coastal Management, but after listening to Mark Gibbs, I've decided we're not coastal engineers, we're actually innovation consultants in the coastal zone. I'm also Chief Engineer of EcoCoast based in Dubai. That's one of our spin-off companies that basically commercialises a lot of the knowledge that we gained along the Queensland coast. Third hat is an adjunct research fellow at Griffith Uni, because a lot of our projects involve very focused R&D, and we bring the academics on. And the video you see there, that's Narranac Reef that Roger just talked about. We involved 4 universities in that project. It was reasonably fast-tracked by City of Gold Coast. What's interesting is that that's one of my engineers, that'll be Sam King, I'm sure, working hard. It was an engineering structure to protect the coastline. We scaled up sandbags, large sandbags, to 300-tonne sandbags, and we found that provided a fantastic substrate for soft growth. And so not only did we achieve the engineering, we also achieved, and I'll say inadvertently, a good ecological outcome as well. I'm the fourth in the group of 5, so there's one more paper, the Funding and Collaborative Capital, tomorrow. I'm going to need to move quickly. Over the last couple of days, we've heard that this is a complex, wicked problem. I think that's putting it mildly. And also that a lot of people are saying we need to act now, but don't forget the financial constraints and beware the risks. Fortunately, engineers are fairly risk averse because when we do have stuff-ups, they're major and they make front page. Also, I'm hearing that researchers want to get out of the labs and into the field, which is where us engineers think you should be. David Mead also said that engineering is there. I think he actually said the technology is there. It's a complex, wicked problem, but I don't think it's an impossible one. Data? One of the issues is, have we got data gaps, or have we got enough to start? Well, you never have enough data, but have we got enough? And as Roger said, you never have 100% as an engineer, so we have factor of safeties and we have assumptions, and we generally get it right. And I've heard over the last couple of days that there's over 10,000 papers on coral. I just did some quick sums. That sounds like about $1 billion worth of research floating out there. And that's why, but unless it gets into something like the Knowledge Hub, it's not very usable for industry. Imagine having a project and saying, now you need to read 10,000 papers. At least with the beaches, the Gold Coast, you go to the Knowledge Hub and you can pick out what papers are relevant to the subject you're on. There's also probably more than hundreds of papers on the physical processes by coastal engineers. I think there's probably thousands for the Great Barrier Reef. So we've got a very strong database. Mark Gibbs also talked about optioneering the other day, choosing the options, trying to get it right. The only thing I'd say there is, for every complex problem there is an answer that is clear, simple, and invariably wrong. It's not a simple problem, and there's unlikely to be a single simple answer. So in context, Sam King earlier today pointed out that it really fits in the category of moonshot project. It's a big one, but that also means that there's huge opportunities to leverage the scientific knowledge, and as I just said, there's probably at least $1 billion worth of it out there on this area, and to export new technologies. I mean, we've been doing that on the beaches and coastal management for decades now, exporting Queensland coastal expertise. And as with the beaches, we're in a position to position Queensland as a world leader in reef restoration, education and research. And it's not just about doing it. You know, we can attract, if the Great Barrier Reef becomes the centre for reef restoration, you'll bring in an awful lot of foreign students. And the other thing is that you end up with a lot of data, which is where you feed it back into the universities. We found on the Gold Coast beaches that we were data rich, but by giving that data with no strings attached to the university, we got it come back to us in sensible forms like graphs and formulas that us average managers can understand and use. As Sam King said the other day, earlier today, we'll need to scale up, same as NASA did. They went from a rocket 14 metres tall to 110 metres tall. You know, that's a cubic function. You know, they scaled it up by 8 times the height. But the good thing about that is, you know, we end up with a long-term legacy if you get it right. And I don't see why there seems to be the expertise in Australia and Queensland to get it right. Queensland's not new to moonshot projects. The eroded beaches, and probably a lot of you here aren't old enough to remember that, that's the 1967 event that caused devastation along the coastline. The whole east coast of Australia was eroded, and that was a result of back-to-back storms over the previous decade and a half. So we had a huge financial cost to the coastal tourist industry, and yeah, a lot of the works are the same as the Great Barrier Reef. You know, huge value in the beaches. Who was going to fix them? There was an economic study done, same as for the reef. It said that federal government should contribute 40%, state 40%, local government 20%. The Fed said no. The state said we'll delegate the funding to the local authorities and we'll give them 20%. Fairly harsh. Gold Coast at that stage was 70,000 people and had a problem probably worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But you wouldn't believe what that sort of stress in Australia results in innovation. You know, we brought in the Dutch at that stage to advise us. We're now the leaders. The other thing I should say is that was 67. First coastal engineering conference was in 1973. It was very much like this meeting here. The same sort of discussions about costs, you know, risks, and you know, you guys, same, but it's doable. 50 years later, you know, the Gold Coast beaches are wide, resilient, and in 2016, when we had a series of storms along the east coast of Australia, Gold Coast beaches were healthy, weathered it, unlike the photo that Roger showed you. I first saw that was headlines in Dubai. I was there on a project at that stage, so I looked at it and I said, to be expected. I didn't think much of it because the headlines, the media said that the local council was arranging to build a temporary seawall. Yeah, fine. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from the various property owners saying, apparently it's going to take 8 weeks to build a wall. The next morning, and it's going to take 8 weeks to get sandbags from Germany and whatever. Anyhow, next morning, 3 truckloads of sandbags arrived from the Gold Coast. I flew down, we started constructing. The point there is that Queensland, we have experience in doing things. So we're learning as we go. Our dredging's getting better, our coastal engineering's getting better. New South Wales, yeah, generalisation, they have no real experience with building anything, so when it hits the fan, they really can't react. So it's a very good reason for starting to get your feet in the water, doing things now with the Great Barrier Reef. Just learn slowly, don't leave it till it looks like that. Is the project feasible? Theoretically, yes. David Mead touched on that earlier. What do? I'm suggesting that we stage it, start with large-scale prototype solutions in selected areas and scale up. What are the priority areas? I would have said the high-use tourist areas, but after listening to the haven concept, I'd said they become a haven. the priority areas are actually the damaged areas, and a lot of that makes sense because you can probably do no damage there. I'd say start with artificial reefs. It also provides designated research zones in areas you can't damage for research, and that there's some there now, but it enables more scientists to get in the field. I'll go fairly quickly. I mean, it's a cycle of design, monitor, refine and upscale, and that reduces the risk, manages impacts, focuses on monitoring and learning. Let's go. A couple of days ago, Adam Smith and Ian McLeod had a nice graphic in the conversation. As Sheridan said, we need step change. There's a lot of reef restoration activities happening out there, but we need to go the next step. We looked at all the conventional reef units some years ago, and what was really interesting and slightly depressing as an engineer was a pile of rocks. Performed better than just about everything else, and it was cheapest. We do, for the scale of the reef, we do need to upscale. There are a couple of photos there of the Yongala, which is an artificial structure placed in the lagoon of the Great Barrier Reef. But what's interesting about that is that we studied what the top 100 dive sites were. What brings the tourists? And a diver is a high-value tourist. It's actually the fish. It's the coral habitat, not the individual corals. So it's more than coral. And what we've been looking at is large 3D ecosystem structures. And Frank said, hey, it's the ecosystem, not the coral. And I agree with him 100%. And now, it's obvious that larvae seeding for maximum habitat and resilience is well proven. So I'd say, big problem, think big, it's multifaceted, think multifunctional, aligned with the Queensland Employment, Innovation and Ecotourism plans. This is where your funding comes in. Tourism. You know, already we've got dive, snorkel, glass bottom boats. You know, going on what Frank said about the value of these places, you know, I think the operator's going to have to bring in more upmarket products and charge more. We need to look at, but when we put things in, they need to have an education value, and the previous earlier paper touched on that, and research. Keep getting the data back because data is very valuable, almost there. We did develop this design for restoration of a reef in the Arabian Gulf, you know, very much with marine biologists, to come up with an ecosystem, not just a module. At the moment we're working on a multifunctional, multi-disciplinary monitoring station off the Gold Coast with Griffith Unit, with Roger. If you listen to Robert, it's not that much harder to expand that along the whole Queensland coast with hubs that each have a purpose and an income and value and high value.